The morning of my 63rd birthday, I was standing at the kitchen window with a mug of tea I hadn't touched yet, watching the neighbor's dog dig up the same patch of lawn it had been working on for 3 days, and I thought, this is the most peaceful I've felt in years. That should have told me something. My phone was on the counter behind me. I could hear it buzzing. I didn't turn around. I want to explain something before I go any further, because I know how these stories can sound. The bitter mother. The ungrateful children, the dramatic falling out at some restaurant while everyone stares. That's not quite what this is. Or maybe it is, a little. But the part that matters to me, the part I keep coming back to, is the morning before any of it happened. The tea going cold, the dog and the lawn, the quiet. I grew up in Sudbury, the second of 5 kids in a house that was never quiet for a single hour. My father worked at the Inco smelter and my mother cleaned offices downtown 3 nights a week. We weren't poor, not the way some families were poor, but money had a texture in our house. You felt it when you reached for something. I left at 18 for Toronto, enrolled in a hotel and tourism program at George Brown that I paid for myself through a combination of a student loan I was still paying off at 27 and a job at a diner near Bathurst that smelled permanently of bacon grease and old coffee. I met my husband there. He wasn't a customer, he was the line cook on weekends. A quiet man from Cape Breton who could debone a chicken in 45 seconds and had opinions about chowder that he would share with you whether you asked or not. We got married in 1987. Small ceremony, his mother's backyard in Glace Bay, a borrowed dress. We moved back to Toronto, then eventually to Barrie when our daughter was 3, and the city started feeling like something we were losing a fight against. He got a job managing a kitchen supply warehouse. I went back to what I knew, which was hospitality. Front desk at a mid-range hotel, then assistant manager, then manager. 21 years at the same property. I knew every room number by heart. I knew which elevator ran slow and which ice machine on the 4th floor made a sound like someone sighing. We had 2 children. Our daughter is 34 now. Our son is 31. I won't dress them up for you. They are not monsters. But somewhere in the years after their father died, he had a massive heart attack in the parking lot of a Canadian Tire in February of 2019, which is the most unfair sentence I have ever had to say out loud. Something shifted. In them, maybe. In me, probably. In the way we all moved around each other. My husband's name was Gerald. I will call him that because I want to. When Gerald died, I was 58. I had some savings, a paid-off house, a pension I'd been contributing to for 2 decades, and a grief that sat in my chest like wet cement. My daughter flew home from Vancouver. My son drove up from Hamilton. They stayed for a week. Then they went back to their lives, which is what people do, which I understood, which I will not blame them for. What I will say is that after Gerald died, a pattern emerged. It was slow at first, so slow I didn't see it as a pattern. It felt like family. It felt like closeness. My daughter called more often. We talked for hours sometimes. She told me about her job, she works in marketing, and about her partner. A man I will call her partner because that is what he is, and about their apartment and their plans and their frustrations. I listened. I am a good listener. I always have been. My son called less, but visited more. He'd show up on a Sunday with laundry and stay for dinner. He'd mention, in the way he has of mentioning things, that his truck needed work or that rent had gone up again or that things were tight this month. I always found a reason to press something into his hand before he left. A check, usually. Sometimes cash. I told myself it was what Gerald would have done. Gerald was generous to a fault. I used to tease him about it. The dinners started the 2nd year after Gerald died. Birthday dinners, mostly. Then it spread. Mother's Day. Christmas Eve. Any occasion that had a name. Someone would choose a restaurant. Always my daughter's partner, who has strong opinions about restaurants, and everyone would show up, and at the end I would pay. It was assumed. No one said it directly. It was just the water we were all swimming in. By the 3rd year, I was paying for 5 or 6 people at a time, sometimes more if friends were included. Fine dining, usually. The kind of place where the menu doesn't have prices on the version they hand to the guest of honor. The kind of place where the sommelier recommends things and no one says no. I didn't say anything. I want to be honest about that. I chose not to say anything for a long time. Partly because I didn't want to be the kind of mother who makes everything about money. Partly because it was easier. Partly because, after Gerald died, keeping everyone at the table, literally and otherwise, felt like the only job I had left. But something changes in you, slowly, when you are always the one who pays for a celebration that was someone else's idea at a place you didn't choose. It's not anger, exactly. It's more like a slow erosion. Like standing on a lakeshore while the water keeps coming. The birthday that almost broke me wasn't mine. It was my son-in-law's, my daughter's partner. He turned 40 in April, and my daughter had decided, she told me, not asked me, told me, that she was booking a private room at a steakhouse in downtown Toronto. 14 people, Saturday night. She had already confirmed the date. She told me this on a Tuesday phone call while I was in the middle of making soup. She said, "The deposit is $1,200 and they need a credit card to hold the room." I said, "Okay." She said, "I figured I'd give them yours." I stood there holding a wooden spoon over a pot of potato leek soup and I said, "Okay," again. And then we talked for another 20 minutes about something I can't remember, and I hung up, and I stood there until the soup boiled over. That was March. I spent April at that dinner. I spent just under $3,000, including wine and the gratuity, for a celebration of a man I have always found difficult to talk to, and who did not thank me that evening, not once. Not when we sat down, not when we left. In May, on the drive home from my monthly lunch with my friend. Her name is Patricia. She's a retired nurse practitioner from Sault Ste. Marie. She's the sharpest person I know. I said it out loud for the first time. "I think I'm being taken advantage of." Patricia didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I think you've known that for a while." That's the thing about having a friend who spent 30 years assessing patience. She doesn't waste words. I went home that evening, and I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, and I added it up. Not all of it. I didn't have receipts going back 5 years, but the last 2 years. What I could remember, what I could piece together from my bank statements. Restaurant bills. Contributions toward trips I was invited on at the last minute. A loan to my son that had a very different energy than a loan. $41,000 in 2 years. I am not a woman who is reckless with money. I retired from the hotel at 61 with a good pension, a TFSA I've been adding to since they were introduced, and some RRSPs I've been drawing down carefully. I am not rich. I am comfortable in the particular way that requires you to stay careful. $41,000 in 2 years is not an abstraction to me. I did not show the number to anyone. I folded the paper and put it in the drawer under the phone, where Gerald used to keep takeout menus. My birthday is in October. I'm a Libra, which I don't believe in, but Gerald always said it explained a lot about me, the way I could hold 2 completely opposite feelings at the same time and not feel the need to resolve them. He wasn't wrong. My 63rd birthday fell on a Thursday. In August, my daughter called and asked what I wanted to do. Before I could answer, she said that she'd been thinking it would be lovely to do something special. A dinner, maybe the new farm-to-table place that had opened in Collingwood. She'd heard wonderful things. She said she'd organize it. I asked, "How many people?" She said, "Oh, just close family, maybe 12. 13. Megan and Josh will come down, and I think Connor's bringing his girlfriend. Megan and Josh are her in-laws. Connor is my son. I have never met the girlfriend." I said, "That sounds lovely." She said, "Amazing. I'll sort out the details and send you the link so you can put in your card info for the reservation." There it was, right there. Not even a pause around it. Just the assumption, delivered the way you'd mention the weather. I said, "Sure." I hung up. I sat for a moment. Then I opened my laptop. I booked a flight to Halifax. I want to explain why Halifax, because I think it matters. Gerald and I went to Halifax for our 25th anniversary. We drove from Barrie to North Sydney, took the ferry to Newfoundland, then drove back through Cape Breton, stopping for 2 nights in Baddeck, 1 night in Antigonish, and then down into Halifax for the last 3 days. We ate lobster on a dock. We walked the waterfront. We stayed at a small inn on Barrington Street, run by a woman who baked her own bread every morning and left a loaf outside your door. Gerald said it was the best trip he'd ever taken. He said that at least 4 times over those 2 weeks. I thought about that on the ferry, on the drive, at the dock. I thought about it constantly. I had been meaning to go back ever since he died. I kept not going. There was always something, a dinner to attend, a check to write. I booked the inn on Barrington Street. The woman who ran it had retired. Her daughter was managing it now, but when I explained why I was calling instead of booking online, the daughter said, "My mom still bakes the bread. She just does it because she wants to." I cried a little when I hung up. I do that more easily now than I used to. The flight was a Thursday morning out of Pearson, which meant I would land in Halifax around noon on my birthday, have 3 full days, and fly back Sunday evening in time to do my laundry and go grocery shopping on Monday like a normal person. I did not tell my children. I want to be clear about my reasoning, because it wasn't cruelty. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. I thought about telling them. I picked up the phone twice. But I kept asking myself what would happen if I did tell them. There would be a conversation. In that conversation, someone would point out that it was my birthday, that everyone was coming, that the reservation was made, that it would be awkward to cancel. There would be a particular tone that my daughter uses when plans are disrupted, a tightening in her voice that makes me feel, even at 63, like I've done something wrong. And then I would go to the dinner. I would sit at the head of the table. I would pay. I decided to just go. I did tell Patricia. She laughed for a long time. Then she said, "Take pictures of the lobster." I packed light. I've been packing light since my 20s. The hotel industry teaches you that. 2 pairs of good walking shoes, layers, 1 dress in case I wanted to go somewhere nice on my own. I put Gerald's old waterproof jacket in the bag. It's too big for me, but I like wearing it. The morning I left, I drove myself to the airport at 5 a.m. I had a coffee at one of the terminal cafes, the kind that isn't very good, but is exactly what you need at that hour. My phone had 12 unread texts from the family group chat about dinner logistics. I read them while I drank my coffee. My daughter's partner had sent a screenshot of a parking app near the restaurant. My son had replied with a thumbs up. Someone had asked about dietary restrictions. I put my phone back in my bag. I boarded the flight just after 7. I had a window seat. When we crossed over Georgian Bay, I looked down at the water, which was very blue and very still from that height, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was tight. The texts started around noon. I was at the inn by then, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at the harbor through a window that rattled slightly in the sea breeze. My room was small and the duvet had a pattern of tiny blue anchors on it, and it was the most comfortable I'd felt in months. The first text was from my daughter. "Hey Mom, just confirming, reservation is at 7. Are you driving or do you want us to pick you up?" Then from my son, 10 minutes later, "Hey, what time will you be here? Connor's bringing Jess." Finally lull. Then from my daughter again, "Mom." Then from my son, "Mom, are you okay?" Then from my daughter, in a slightly different register, "We're at the restaurant. Where are you?" I was at a fish and chip shop on the waterfront by then, eating haddock out of paper with a wooden fork, watching a pair of seagulls negotiate loudly over a dropped chip. It was 4 degrees, and the wind was off the ocean, and I was wearing Gerald's jacket. It was the best meal I'd eaten in years. I don't say that to be dramatic. There's something about eating when you're actually hungry, in a place you actually want to be, that changes the food. I texted back a single message to both of them. "Happy to let you know I'm in Halifax for my birthday. Have a wonderful dinner. I'll call when I'm home Sunday." I put the phone in my pocket and watched the seagulls. My daughter called 4 times. I let it ring. My son called twice. A few minutes after his second call, he texted, "What do we do about the bill?" I have thought about that text many times since. What do we do about the bill? Not "Are you okay?" or "We miss you," or even "What happened?" Just, what do we do about the bill? He's 31 years old, and that was his first complete thought. I didn't answer it. I went back to my fish and chips. Later, when I was walking along the waterfront in the dark, the lights on the harbor reflecting in long orange lines across the water, my daughter sent a longer message. She was upset. The restaurant had held them responsible for the private room, which had a minimum spend. She said it had been embarrassing. She said she didn't understand why I hadn't said something instead of just disappearing. She said that everyone was confused and that Jess, my son's girlfriend, whom I'd never met, had seemed uncomfortable and that it had ruined the evening. I read the message 3 times. I noticed what wasn't in it. There was no happy birthday. There was no I'm glad you're doing something for yourself. There was nothing about me at all, really, except as the person whose absence had caused inconvenience. I wrote back the next morning, after I'd slept and had tea and watched the harbor fill up with gray light. I wrote, I love you both very much. I want you to know that. I have loved every birthday dinner and Christmas dinner and all the other dinners. I'm glad we have those memories. I've decided that for my birthday this year, I wanted to go somewhere that mattered to me, and I did that. I should have told you sooner, and I'm sorry for the confusion. When I'm home Sunday, we can talk if you'd like. My daughter responded with a paragraph about responsibility and communication. My son responded with a thumbs up, which I've decided to interpret as acceptance. On Friday, I drove a rental car out to Peggy's Cove. I've been there once, years ago with Gerald when the kids were small. I stood at the lighthouse for a long time. The rock was pink and gray, and the waves were coming in long and slow and enormous. I took a picture and I sent it to Patricia, who sent back a lobster emoji. On Saturday, I went to the inn's small dining room for breakfast and ended up talking for 2 hours with a retired school principal from Charlottetown named Bruce, who was there because his wife had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he needed, he said, to be somewhere different and quiet for a few days. We talked about our spouses. We talked about Cape Breton, which he knew well. We talked about the particular loneliness of being somewhere you love with someone you've lost. It was the best conversation I'd had in a long time. When we said goodbye, he said, I hope you get more birthdays like this one. I said I intended to. When I got home Sunday evening, there were 2 cars in my driveway, my daughter and her partner, my son. I want to be honest about what I felt when I saw them. It was not the warm rush of family, the way these moments are supposed to feel. It was closer to tiredness, the particular tiredness of knowing that what is a conversation you have been postponing. We sat in my living room. My daughter did most of the talking. The minimum spend at the restaurant had been $1,800. They had, between the 4 adults, covered it. She wanted me to understand how stressful it had been. She wanted me to understand that people had driven a long way. She said, You could have just told us you didn't want to come, I said. I wanted to be in Halifax, she said. That's not the point. My son sat with his hands on his knees and said nothing, which is his way. I waited until she was finished. Then I said carefully, I've been thinking about something, and I want to share it with you because I think you both deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort. They looked at me. In the last 2 years, I have contributed significantly to a lot of family occasions that I didn't plan and didn't choose. I've done that happily because I love you, and because for a long time it felt like the right thing to do. But I've realized that what I've built up for myself, what I spent 30 years building, is not something I can keep drawing down to cover dinners that I wasn't asked about. I was just expected to attend and pay for. And I should have said something a long time ago, so part of this is on me. My daughter said, We always assumed you were happy to. I said, I know, that's what I'm telling you. There was a long pause. My son said quietly, Is everything okay? Financially? I said, Yes. But I want it to stay that way. The conversation lasted another hour. Parts of it were hard. My daughter said things that stung, and I said things that were probably too direct, and her partner sat in the armchair by the window and studied his shoes with great intensity. But there was also, underneath the difficulty, something that felt like relief. Like the first real thing we'd said to each other in years. They left around 9. My son hugged me at the door for a long time, without saying anything, which is how he says everything that matters. My daughter hugged me too, a little stiffly, and then turned back at the end of the walk and said, I don't know why you didn't just talk to us. I said, I'm talking to you now. She nodded. She got in the car. I locked the door. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd sat with a notepad in the spring, where Gerald used to keep the takeout menus in the drawer below. I didn't open the drawer. I just sat there. Somewhere in the conversation I hadn't mentioned what I'd decided while I was in Halifax, sitting in the dining room with Bruce from Charlottetown, and the sound of the wind off the harbor. I'll mention it now. Gerald had a small life insurance policy. Not large. He wasn't the type to think much about that sort of thing. But enough that after the funeral and the immediate expenses, there was a remainder sitting in an account I hadn't touched. It wasn't a fortune. It was, in the way of Gerald's approach to most things, quiet and practical, and exactly enough. I've used part of it to set up a small bursary at the high school here in Barrie, named for him, for a graduating student who is the first in their family to go to post-secondary, which Gerald was, which I was, which feels right in a way I don't know how to explain better than that. The first year's recipient was announced last month. I went to the ceremony alone, which is the first time I've attended something like that alone, and I sat in the second row, and when they said Gerald's name, I pressed my hand flat against the front of my jacket. His jacket, and I breathed. My daughter and I talk every week now. Some weeks are easier than others. She is still learning, I think, that I am a person with a shape of my own, not just a support structure in her life. And I am still learning how to let her learn that, without making it harder than it has to be. My son calls on Sundays, usually in the evening, and we talk about small things. His truck, a show he's watching, something funny that happened at work. Last Sunday he called to tell me a joke that I will not repeat, because it wasn't very good, but I laughed genuinely, which is the most important thing. I went back to Halifax in March, stayed at the same inn. The bread was on the doorstep in the morning, exactly as I remembered it. I sat at the window that rattles in the sea breeze, and I drank my tea while it was still hot, and I watched the harbor, and I thought about Gerald, and about how much there still is, and how much time I spent not quite living in it. Not anymore.